Basically educated myself. And then I'd always been buying and selling stuff. My dad had a little coin shop, and I wanted a pawn shop.
Rick Harrison's world has crumbled, and his son's mistakes have destroyed everything. The one glorious pawn empire is drowning in lawsuits, betrayals, and scandals that never seem to stop. Family feuds have turned into courtroom battles, trusted experts have been exposed as frauds, and even the shop itself is barely staying afloat. Tune in because the final blow is coming, and it's worse than anyone could have imagined. Built to last or doomed to fail, the Gold and Silver Pawn Shop in Las Vegas started as a simple business run by Richard Oldman Harrison. He was tough, he knew his stuff, and he kept things running. When he passed away in the year 2018, everything changed. Rick, the son who turned the family shop into a hit television show, had to handle business without his father's wisdom. Turns out, he was not as great at keeping the family together as he was at flipping rare collectibles. Just when it seemed like the shop could weather any storm, a betrayal from within threatened to tear everything apart. Pawn Stars exploded in popularity when it aired on the History Channel in the year 2009. The whole concept was genius. Customers brought in cool, weird, and sometimes priceless items, and the Harrisons decided whether they were worth buying. Fortunately, none of the Playboys were worth any money. Most of them were in really bad condition, and there wasn't a prize in the bunch. All right, Peaches will take care of you. Thanks for coming in. Thanks for fans. Loved the mix of business, history, and fun. Plus, there was the ongoing family banter and Chumley, the shop's goofy employee, who became a fan favorite. But behind the scenes, things were not so lighthearted. First came the legal drama with Rick's own mother, Joanne Harrison. The family feud exploded when she accused Rick of tricking her out of her stake in the business. She claimed that after waking up from a coma in the early 2000s, Rick made her sign over her 51% share of the pawn shop, something she later regretted. When Richard Harrison passed, Joanne was supposed to inherit his 49% share, but Rick was not handing over the paperwork. Allegedly, she could not even get a proper accounting of over $500,000 worth of cash and silver. It got so bad that Joanne sued her own son, demanding her fair cut and a restraining order to stop him from selling off assets. Rick fired back, saying his mother was being manipulated by outside influences. Lawsuits, back and forth, accusations. This was not just family drama. This was war. And just when things could not get worse, the business itself started sinking. Thanks to the COVID-19 pandemic, the pawn shop's profits plummeted. The place that used to bring in over $1 million a year barely made $37,000 in the year 2020. But even that financial hit was nothing compared to the personal disasters of those involved in the show. Let's talk about Chumley. For years, he played the comic relief, the not-so-smart guy who somehow managed to keep his job, but off-screen a different story. In the year 2012, he was caught on camera in a street fight. Then, in the year 2016, police raided his house as part of a sexual assault investigation. What they found: methamphetamine, marijuana, unregistered guns, and a lot of trouble. The sexual assault charges did not stick, but the drugs and illegal weapons did. For $330,000 plus an additional $30,000 worth, Chumley had to take a plea deal to stay out of prison. After that, he kept a low profile, but his reputation was forever tainted. Rick's son, Corey Big Hoss Harrison, also had his share of wild behavior. During a motorcycle trip, he got into trouble at a bar, urinated in public, and threw a stool, earning himself a swift exit. If that was not enough, he later got into a lawsuit over a rented recreational vehicle he allegedly wrecked and refused to pay for. The owner claimed Corey's assistant made excuses and delayed returning the vehicle. By the time it was sent back, it was trashed inside and out, littered with bottles and other junk. The owner estimated the damages at $30,000. Corey, of course, denied responsibility. The scandals did not stop with the main cast. The show relied on so-called experts to evaluate rare items, but even they had their fair share of controversy. One of the toy experts, Johnny Jimenez Jr., got arrested for domestic violence. An autograph authenticator, John Resnikoff, got caught misidentifying a signature, proving that even the so-called experts were not foolproof. But the biggest blow came from Drew Max, a sports memorabilia expert who was exposed for authenticating fake items. He used his television fame to build trust, and then scammed buyers into purchasing worthless sports collectibles. Fans started questioning if the entire show was a scam. And then there was Olivia Black. She joined Pawn Stars in the year 2012, quickly becoming a fan favorite. But then she vanished. Nude photos surfaced online from her past, and the show's producers dropped her without hesitation. Fans were furious. She was not fired from the pawn shop itself, just the show. She later pursued a modeling and adult entertainment career, proving that she was not going to let the show define her. Things got even worse when the pawn shop was accused of melting down a stolen antique coin collection. A man claimed his niece had stolen his $50,000 collection and sold it to Gold and Silver Pawn. He ended up going broke in 1981, and all of a sudden, they were going to move to the land of milk and honey, Las Vegas. But when he tried to recover the coins, they were gone. The shop claimed they could not identify the coins and had likely melted them down, leaving the man with nothing. Even Rick's business ventures outside the pawn shop failed. He tried launching Pawn Plaza, a retail center with shops and restaurants, expecting it to be a hit because of the show's fame. It flopped. Shop owners accused Rick of failing to promote the place, and many businesses shut down. Lawsuits followed, and Pawn Plaza became another failed experiment. Over the years, Pawn Stars lost its authenticity. Fans started noticing how scripted everything felt. The spontaneous fun was gone. Instead of real customers walking in with interesting items, the show started staging everything. Arguments between the cast felt fake, and the whole thing turned into a family soap opera. The show that once educated viewers about history and antiques had turned into a reality television mess. By the time the 21st season aired, the magic was gone. Ratings fell, the scandals piled up, and what was once a fresh, fun take on pawn shop culture became another reality show drowning in controversy. But just when it seemed like the shop had seen it all, an unexpected find would challenge everything they thought they knew about rare collectibles. A bike bonus and bling. Chumley was just out handling some boring shop errands when something stopped him in his tracks. There it was, standing tall in a driveway like a gleaming prize, the Space Lander. Now, Chumley had a bit of bike knowledge, and this one was a real gem. He had only ever seen one in pictures, maybe in a museum once, but never up close. It was just too good to pass up, so he pulled over to check it out. The guy who owned it was an old-school bike enthusiast. He was not just any random person with a dusty bike in the garage. This was his pride and joy. He had owned it since the early 1960s when he got it for Christmas, and let's just say he was not exactly eager to part with it. Not surprising, considering there were barely any of these bikes left in the world. Designed by an ex-Tucker automobile engineer, only around 80 were ever made. Most ended up in basements or got scrapped when no big bike companies wanted to mass-produce them. That made this one insanely rare. Chumley had to tread carefully, but he also knew this was a once-in-a-lifetime shot. The guy threw out a massive number, $20,000. He was not about to drop that kind of cash without a fight. He started low, aiming for $7,400, but the seller was not having it. After some classic back and forth, they landed on $8,700. Not cheap, but still a steal for something this rare. Chumley made the deal, shaking hands and sealing one of his best buys yet. Now, of course, the real test was back at the shop. He had just dropped a serious chunk of change on a bike, and he had no idea how Rick would take it. As expected, Rick was not exactly throwing a parade when he heard how much Chumley had spent. But once he saw the bike, different story. This was not just some beat-up old ride, so those that were in the bicycle shops. If they couldn't sell them, they scrapped them. There's only a handful known to exist in private collectors' rest and museums. This was a pristine Space Lander, untouched for decades, all original paint and parts, a true collector's dream. Rick, being Rick, needed the numbers. What was the value? What was the market? Chumley knew his stuff. These bikes went anywhere from $12,000 to $20,000, sometimes more if the right buyer showed up. The condition on this one was pretty much as good as it gets. Rick had to admit it was a solid deal. That was when things took an unexpected turn. Instead of getting chewed out, Chumley got a surprise. His first ever bonus, a clean $11,000 straight from Rick. That was $100 bills for those counting. The shop boss had been noticing Chumley's hustle lately, and this deal was the cherry on top. A move like this deserves some recognition, and for once he was not just the guy messing up, he was the guy making money for the shop. Now, what did Chumley do with this extra cash? Well, if anyone knew him, They knew he was not about to stash it in some boring investment. Stocks? Not interested. Savings? Who needs that? He had one plan and one plan only: gold teeth, a custom gold grill. Because why not? The moment that cash hit his hands, he already saw himself flashing that blinged-out smile. Rick, trying to knock some sense into him, suggested something a little more practical. Maybe some Apple stock, Google shares, a future investment. Chumley was not hearing any of that. To him, gold teeth were the best investment of all. And with that, he was off, marching straight to the jeweler, visions of shiny gold and diamonds dancing in his head. That Space Lander was more than just a bike. It was a rare find, a piece of history, and the kind of deal that did not come around often. The fact that it landed Chumley, his first bonus, just made the whole thing even sweeter. The shop had seen its fair share of crazy buys, but this was one for the books. This bike was not just some collector's item gathering dust. It had a story, a legacy, and an owner who had cherished it for decades. It was built in the late 1950s by an engineer who had high hopes of changing the way bicycles looked. The guy that designed this thing was an engineer in a Tucker automobile. He designed this thing, made like 80 of them, put them around bicycle shops throughout the United States and Europe, hoping people would place mass orders on them like Schwinn. He made only a handful, hoping they would catch on like wildfire, but when big brands ignored his futuristic design, most of them disappeared, either scrapped or hidden away in basements and storage units. The frame was made of fiberglass, something unheard of at the time. It had a sleek, modern shape that looked straight out of a science fiction movie. The design even included battery-powered lights integrated into the frame, which was revolutionary for its time. Every part of the bike screamed innovation, from the curved fenders to the unique chain guard. It was way ahead of its time, and that was probably why it never took off. People just were not ready for it. The owner had kept this bike in pristine condition for over 50 years. It had never been repainted, never been modified, never been left outside to rust. It was the kind of piece museums would fight over, and yet it had been sitting in a garage all this time, waiting for the right person to come along and appreciate it for what it was worth. The son knew this was a high-stakes buy. He was gambling nearly $99,000 on something that might take time to sell, but he also knew that for the right collector, this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. People paid big money for vintage bicycles, especially ones with such a limited production. There were only a few left in the world, and each one that popped up on the market disappeared quickly. Rick was not the kind of guy to throw money around without a plan. If he was willing to reward Chumley with a bonus, that meant he truly believed in the deal. He had seen plenty of questionable purchases over the years, but this was different. This was something special, something rare, something that could turn a serious profit. Some purchases make history, others make headlines, and then there are the ones that make everyone question your judgment when hydraulics take over common sense. When it comes to regrettable decisions, Chumley never disappoints. This time it revolves around an ancient Buick Regal that, for some baffling reason, he had to have. The car rolled into the store looking like it had been teleported straight from the 1980s, sporting a flashy paint job that screamed midlife crisis in bold neon colors. The seller strolled in with a plan to offload this relic, citing a growing collection of vehicles as his reason for parting with it. He was hoping to pocket at least $2,500, though he was mentally prepared to settle for $2,000. The truth, however, was evident to anyone who understood cars. Throwing extravagant cash into a vintage vehicle does not miraculously inflate its worth. The truth was this thing was a shiny scrap heap with expensive wheels. The owner made a compelling sales pitch, branding it as the pinnacle of American luxury. He boasted about gutting the interior, swapping out the seats, the steering wheel, and the sound system. The exterior had been decorated with traditional lowrider patterns, and he had installed new rims. The original V6 engine had been ripped out and replaced with a V8. It was, in his words, a masterpiece of customization. However, anyone with a grain of common sense knew that just because money had been spent on modifications, it did not mean the car was now a gold mine. The resale value of a Buick Regal from that era was still depressingly low, no matter how much effort had been put into sprucing it up. Then came the moment everyone dreaded. The shop's biggest impulse buyer locked eyes on the car, and the damage was already done. He was mesmerized. Instead of playing it cool, as any skilled negotiator should, he immediately gushed over the vehicle. The seller had to be grinning inside. The overeager buyer was already hooked, and the price was about to reflect that. It was time to talk figures. The seller had dumped at least $10,000 into this vehicle, But deep down he knew he would never recover that. He confidently threw out his price of $2,500, hoping for a miracle. Cars, people just love to customize. They put a big chunk of money into pricey wheels and custom paint jobs, but it really doesn't up the value of the car at all. The counteroffer was far from flattering. $1,000. That was when the haggling truly began. The seller insisted that the tires alone were worth $11,000, which only highlighted how questionable his purchasing choices had been. The back-and-forth negotiations were excruciating. The seller refused to go below $2,000, and instead of walking away, the impulsive buyer decided that was an acceptable deal. Just like that, the sale was locked in. The pawnshop's most unpredictable spender had just acquired a decades-old vehicle that he had no business owning. With his latest acquisition in hand, he wasted no time making plans. More money was about to be burned. The very next stop was Count's Customs, a shop renowned for transforming old vehicles into something slightly more tolerable. Back at the pawn shop, the rest of the crew knew what was coming. Their coworker had no self-control when it came to sinking money into impractical purchases. A few days later, he swaggered back into the shop, beaming with excitement. He was eager to reveal what he considered his latest masterpiece. The reaction from his colleagues was predictable. Not a single person was impressed. The shop's owner, a man who had seen his fair share of financial disasters, could not believe that $2,000 had been thrown at a car that barely deserved a spot in a junkyard. His facial expression alone summed up his opinion on the matter. But this was only the beginning of the financial catastrophe. An additional $33,000 had now been funneled into this bottomless pit. The total investment was sitting at a solid $5,000. And what was the result of this excessive spending? A car that now jumped. That was the grand transformation. Hydraulics had been installed, and the car could now bounce on command. This was the pinnacle of questionable decision-making. The shop's owner simply shook his head, accepting that nothing could be done. The eldest member of the shop, known for his blunt honesty, had the most straightforward opinion. He declared it the most ridiculous thing he had ever seen. But the vehicle's new owner was oblivious to the criticism. He eagerly demonstrated the hydraulic system, gleefully bouncing the car up and down like a child with a new toy. He even had the audacity to offer a ride to the shop's eldest member, which was immediately declined with an unimpressed glare. At the end of the day, $5,000 had been sunk into a vehicle that no one else wanted. The man who sold it walked away with $2,000 in his pocket, undoubtedly thrilled that someone had been foolish enough to take the car off his hands. Meanwhile, the shop's most extravagant spender was convinced he had made the purchase of a lifetime. Was this a reckless waste of money or the ultimate expression of automotive passion? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Like, subscribe, and share for more intriguing stories.